All right, guys, welcome back to the mic drop. Today, I am joined by someone who did just step into HR. He challenged it, he transformed it, he flipped it on his head, and now he leads it on a global scale. He's not just a powerhouse HR leader, but he is also a good friend and a colleague that I deeply respect. Courneen is the Senior Vice President and Global Head of HR at MSI. And before HR, he ran massive operations, warehouses, sales teams, supply chains, you name it. He earned his way into HR, and he earned his seat at the table by delivering results and asking better questions. Since then, he's built global teams, redefined what strategic HR actually looks like, and proven that real impact comes from when HR leads like the business depends on it. Because you know what? It does. And check this out. Fun fact, he used to be a professional dancer and a magician. So we're going to see what kind of magic he can run for us today. Chris, welcome to the mic drop, sir. How are you?
Wonderful, man. How are you?
Man, I am better than I deserve, man. I am so glad I was able to get you nailed down because you're a busy man, dude. Every time I turn around, you're doing something online and somebody's trying to get you interviewed, and I'm glad you're able to share some time with us mere mortals. I appreciate it, brother.
Oh, listen. I would rather hang out with you than most other things I'm doing, so I'm good.
Oh, man, I'm going to go put that in my diary. No, we're going to have some great conversations like we always do, and I think to just give this whole thing justice, I do want to mention like how we met. We met through a shared colleague, good old John Ferguson. Shout out to my boy John, who will be on the show pretty soon. And he connected us. We went to a cigar lounge during the SHRM conference. And we're both in the executive network. And it's just, iron sharpens iron. This dude brought passion to the conversation, and we've just been cool since then. Right? So I do want to start this off and just kick this off with your story, right? Because your path to HR really wasn't the usual path, right? Like I got a degree in HR
Sure.
and I followed the traditional route story. So you kind of came in sideways, and I totally love that. So how did you actually find your way into human resources? Because for most of us, it was a freaking accident. But how did you find your way there, brother?
It's probably part of the accident story. The truth is if I even think maybe the more interesting story is how did I even end up working in like the business world? Because I started my college career and almost finished my college career thinking I'm gonna go get a PhD. I'm gonna never work a day in my life. I'm gonna be in academics. And I was doing research, presenting at conferences. So late in my college career, a month or two before I graduated, I started looking for a job and had the luxury of being picky because I could go get my PhD. I didn't need a job. And that probably was the most fortunate circumstance I could have been in. I interviewed with a number of large companies, and then I stumbled into an organization that reached out to me. I thought it was a scam at first. Never heard of the company, and leveraged the alumni network, found people who from my school had ultimately ended up working at this organization, heard nothing but positive things, and decided to join their management rotation program, and really got my career started as a kind of management trainee. And from there, worked around different parts of that business. And the one area I found myself constantly complaining about was HR. I ultimately at one point was responsible for we call it, an intake department, both in my time in sales and in my time in a warehouse, where I was doing a lot of interviewing and a lot of hiring for people coming into the organization. I was also one of the few doing management interviewing and hiring, and became really fascinated and interested in interviewing and the interviewing process. But then as a leader in the business, when things come up and you need help from someone in HR, I found myself sometimes questioning why we were doing what we were doing, how we were doing what we were doing. I gravitated and was very lucky to have someone who became a mentor before she was my boss, who was our HR director, and learned a lot from her, became very fascinated with the work she was doing, but also was like, I kind of think I could do this more than some of the other people in HR that were supposed to be helping me, because I constantly ended up finding myself going directly to her. And after some complaining and some idea sharing, they ended up moving me into my first HR role, which was really talent acquisition. And my experience there was interesting because ultimately I thought of organizing a talent acquisition group similar to how you would organize a sales group or a warehouse group. It was very process driven, a little more differentiated than how it was organized previous to my time there. And I remember sitting in a meeting and saying, guys, I don't understand why our process takes so long to get a candidate through. And if you think about all the things that we know about how to manage processes as a business, for which this organization was incredibly good, it seems like we can learn a lot from the best practices in other parts of the business and apply them in HR. So if you think about, this is exactly what I said, think about a candidate like a box. We know if you can manage a box through a warehouse quickly, minimize unnecessary touches, get it from A to B, things don't go wrong. You're likely to get that shipment correct. Same is true for a candidate. So how about we measure how a candidate moves through our process? And I had worked previously on creating this big database file that measured our work in process and sales, and it was a large sales project. And I just applied all those things from sales and from the warehouse to talent acquisition, revamped the process, and we ended up hiring people much faster, higher quality candidates, all sorts of things. And I loved the work, but I kept coming back to, this doesn't seem that different than managing any other part of the business. I don't know why people think of this or treat this differently. Talent acquisition is a sales job. It's probably more akin to a sales job than an HR job. And so if you think about your candidate like your customer and apply all the things you know about sales to talent acquisition, I think we can create some better candidate experiences. We should be thinking more about customer service or the candidate experience than we are today. And all of these kind of revelations were then interrupted, and I was moved back out of HR into another part of the business, and then just kept begging to come back. And I was like, hey, I want to learn the rest of this. I want to be exposed to more than talent acquisition. And after, I think, 2-ish years of saying I would really like to do the rest of the HR work, they moved me back in HR, and the rest is history. I've been working in HR ever since.
I think it's really interesting that you actually got your start in HR by challenging HR. That is kind of crazy. And so another follow-up question I have for you is like, so once you kind of got back into HR and you kind of got behind the curtain, I guess the second time, like what were some of the surprises, Chris? Like once you really got into it and you're like, huh?
I can think distinctly of two things. One where I had that moment, and one where everybody else had that moment about me. My first moment was really digging into and learning about employment law in the context of the work in HR and compliance and all those things, and probably the single most impactful interaction I have had, I had early in my career, was in a meeting with the leaders and the owners of that company. This is a very large, multi-billion-dollar organization, very old. It had been around for over 130 years, and we thought we were doing great from an HR perspective. We're not getting sued. In fact, we're not even getting demand letters. It's been like 5 or 6 years since anyone had even thought of trying to pick a fight with us. We were looking for all these ways that I thought you measured the quality of our HR work, these traditional HR measures. We're off the charts, and we're sitting in this meeting, and effectively the number 2 in the company is in this meeting kind of listening and not speaking. And I had some interactions with this person, both during my time leading the warehouse and in sales. And he's a tough cookie, wicked smart, kind of scares a lot of people, really, really good at poking holes in things. And I've learned over the years how to work with all these leaders, and I'm watching him going, something's up. I can see it. And I've been in enough of these meetings with him to know his brain is cranking. And finally, he kind of sits up, and we all stop talking and look at him. And we had just finished talking about how great we are. And he says, what if we don't get sued enough?
What?
And I remember that what you just did is what I did inside. Now, I was smart enough not to do it outside, but I remember sitting there going,
interesting comment.
and he goes, well, wait a minute. So you're telling me that we're doing all this great HR work, but like, what about the business? How many bad business decisions are we making? Because we're over obsessed with risk, that we are worried about this claim we might get and doing everything you can to eliminate the possibility of that claim. But like, how long did that person sit in the organization and tear it apart? Or how long did it take for us to make a decision that we knew from a business perspective was the right decision to make? But, HR got in the way. And he goes, I don't know that it's good that we haven't had anyone try to, because he said, then maybe we're not making good business decisions, because sometimes good managers get themselves in a position where a negative kind of action against the company is initiated from a really bad employee. And he's like, that's okay. As long as we are doing right by people, and we know we're doing right by people, as long as we're fair and we know we're more than fair, the question is, are you also being fair to the business? And that really sat with me.
Wow.
And that was my first big aha moment, and probably dramatically impacted really the way I think about my role as a business leader, even to this day. And then I think the moment for everybody with me was absolutely nothing changed about me or my personality when I worked in HR. I am a little crazy. I am willing to experiment. I'm okay with a few broken eggs. I'm, sometimes I'm just a little nuts at work because I like to have fun. And nothing changed about me in HR. And I think some people thought, oh, HR has to be this like stuffy, ultra conservative, really buttoned down. I was like, no, 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 no. HR's role within the organization is the same as every other business unit in the organization. As long as you're in a for-profit business, we are here to make this business more profitable. And I, at that point, was fortunate enough to really understand how that business worked really well. And I can sit in these meetings. I remember sitting in sales meetings and poking against a senior manager saying, hey, wait a minute. Like, I don't even think you're looking at the sales transaction, right? You're over here talking about how you're going to retrain employees and this person screwed up. You're misunderstanding something about this sales transaction. Let's go dig into this together. And it was one of the first times that group had been challenged by someone in HR where it wasn't an HR challenge. I was challenging the business and a business decision. And I learned through that kind of experience that they had and then I had that I can't be effective in my job if I don't deeply understand the business. My job is to help the business make more money. That doesn't mean just thinking about HR policies and principles and practices. It means thinking about the business and the strategy and all of that. And sometimes that means challenging a business decision, particularly when that decision impacts employees, how we think about developing them, how we think about succession plan, all those things. But it always goes back to the business. And I think that was really the second time I realized there's no way to be successful in this job without deeply understanding the business and everything about how your business operates.
That was really powerful. I like that because honestly, especially that story about do we not get sued enough? Like that did not go where I thought that conversation had went. And that's really cool. And it kind of leads me to my next thing because when you and I were hanging out in San Diego, of course, when people first meet, we talk about war stories, we just talk about, hey, what's going on? And one of the things I found really intriguing about your career, Chris, was that, you made some really bold career moves. I mean, you even there was a situation where you even walked away from a very comfortable, respected role just to take a risk. And, there's people watching this that are sitting in comfortable right now. But I want to give some advice to them who they may be hesitant to take that risk, to take that leap, to bet on themselves versus continuing to be comfortable. So if that person was sitting in front of you, what advice would you give them?
I think particularly within the HR world, you have to make some decisions about the kind of leader you want to be. And you have to make some decisions about the type of role you want to play within your organization. And then you have to evaluate those two things against the value proposition of the organization you're in and the value proposition of other opportunities. I will start by saying my natural inclination is if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it all the way and I'm going to see it through. I am not the type of person that I think would really ever advocate for every 2 or 3 years, you should be looking for a new job. Part of why I personally don't find that fulfilling myself is I am here to make a significant impact on the business. It's hard to make a significant impact on a business in 2 years, at least not a tangible, lasting, durable one. And I start with that perspective. But when you come to the position where you start questioning, what do I want from the workplace, the organization I'm in? What do I want from my own career? I think the other piece of advice is you have to be comfortable with that answer changing over time. Early in my career, really the value proposition of my last organization where I was at for 12 years was work-life balance, really good comp, and there are nothing but wicked smart people in this place, and you will all not get an opportunity that you think you deserve because there's just not enough opportunities. And most people are fine with that because the work-life balance and the comp makes up for it. I use it as a tool when I recruited people all the time. I would recruit. We recruited the store manager from the second highest volume Starbucks at that time in the world, number one in North America. And we sold the work-life balance, your take-home pay, the benefits, all of this to that person who left that job to go pack boxes in a warehouse. at the end of the day, we overpaid. That was part of the strategy. And we really wanted to hire people out of management for non-management roles. And that was the value proposition the organization offered. And for me personally, that's what I needed and what I wanted for quite a number of years. And that started to change over time. And I have, and part of this advice where that story goes is you've got to be honest with yourself when that changes. So I was in a role where I was incredibly comfortable. I loved the organization. I still think very highly of it. I loved the people I worked with. Like every organization, it had its warts, but when you do the costs of pros and cons, the pros continue to outweigh the cons. And I genuinely believed I was retiring from there. I was going to be the weirdo that had one job their whole life. I thought that was pretty cool. That was the organization where I could do it in. The comp was there to get me there. And I understood that I was lucky because as my preferences evolved, the organization was willing to evolve with me. There was a period when I said, I want to be a manager and I don't want to do more than that because I'm not willing to put in the effort, but I'm willing to keep this place running. And I think I'm pretty good at it. That place allowed that for me. And then when I said, my mind is changing, I want to do more. I want more scope and all that. That place allowed for that. So as my preferences changed, they went with me. But when an opportunity presented itself to lead the function, I had to think long and hard about comfort, clear career path, work-life balance that is good. I mean, the way they took care of you from a comp, a retirement, all that, unheard of. There's no business that I can find in this country that does what they did. But on the other side of the fence was an opportunity to create and be creative and build something that was incredibly unique. And the opportunity to lead the function meant a really tough decision. Am I willing to give up the work-life balance? Am I willing, to some extent, am I willing to take a risk? An unknown company, unknown is true for any opportunity you look at in the future. And do I think, despite the risk, the potential upside is significantly higher for what I want in my life at this moment? It took me, I think, 3.5 months to make that decision. It was the toughest decision I ever made in my life was to leave that organization and come here. And they made it really, really hard for me when I told them I was thinking of leaving. And I had a lot of honest discussions with folks. The person who, I was hoping to and clearly being, kind of developed to replace, and other leaders in that organization. And I remember a conversation. One of the people I respect the most that I've ever worked with, he was the VP that ran the place. And he said, listen, if you're thinking of leaving for the opportunity to build something, to lead the function, to do all of that, I will understand. Because clearly you're not going to, the way our business is structured, that's not coming to you in 12 months from now. They just moved someone in who was leading the entire organization. I was not in a position in that company. Plus, I was not even in the right city or state for that. And a number of things that he was very honest about. And he said, if it's for that opportunity, I get it. I'll be okay with it. If it's for any other reason, I'm not okay with it. You better tell me now because we do not want you to leave. That helped me think about, am I leaving for the right reason? And so the last piece of advice is it better be for the right reason. If you know your personal true north and there are 5 other variables floating around, you've got to be really honest about those other variables and work through them and make sure that you're leaving for the right reason. And for me, I think I boil the advice down to be comfortable that what you want in life is going to change over time. I was at a period where I wanted to only work 8 hours a day. I'd recently been married. I didn't want to do, the crazy hours. I didn't want the crazy responsibility. I loved what that place offered. That changed over time. So be comfortable with that. 2, be very honest with yourself about your appetite for risk. I had a mortgage. I had all these other things to think about that I knew were never a worry. And what if this doesn't work out? What if this company I'm going to, either the company blows up or my role blows up? And my job had been open for 2 years, and the CEO, the owner, was very, very clear. Kind of didn't like most HR people. That's the reason the job had been open for 2 years. And is that potential upside worth the risk? And then 3, you've got to, I think, be honest with the people you trust around you and think out loud. Leverage those people, whether they're friends in your circle, coworkers in other organizations, peers that share a similar role with you, mentors, people within your organization who are senior to you that you feel comfortable with. I talked to so many people. I even called someone I hadn't worked with in 4 years. He was now a VP for another very large organization within HR. He was in my mind, one of the best HR people I had worked with. At that point, no one would have even thought I was working in HR when he left. So I called him and had a conversation that kind of shocked him. And I was like, hey, is this worth it? What do you think? You're in the role now in your organization. I need some advice because I trust and respect you, even though I hadn't worked with you in 4 years. And so I think that's the last piece of advice, is talk through these things out loud with people. Don't make these decisions in your own head, because what it does is it solidifies what is right and what is wrong for me.
That is some great advice. I think the risk is what really holds a lot of people in place, because they recognize that there is risk. But, it's just what they always say, right? With great risk comes reward, right? Risk versus reward, high risk, high reward. And it's amazing that you actually had the courage to actually take that leap, because it's a bit of an unknown, right? And it's kind of a difficult challenge. So I'm going to change topics really quick, because now it's time to get to the nitty gritty, right? It's time to get.
Oh, yeah.
It's time to get. And I told you, we're, there's some experiences that you have that I want to kind of dive into and get to the juicy parts of the
Yeah.
the steak that we're going to cut into, right? So first thing, I want to kind of deal into something that people don't want to say out loud, right? But bad leadership tends to change people, and we talk about this all the time. There's a bunch of SHRM articles talks about the impact of bad leaders and things like that. And the problem is that if we don't talk about these things, we end up just kind of repeating the same cycle. And so I'm hoping that you'll bestow upon us some of your wisdom that you've learned over the years about dealing with challenging leaders. And so one of the conversations you and I've had was about dealing with a toxic leader, right? You've actually worked in your past under a toxic leader. In your opinion, Chris, what is like the most damaging thing bad leadership can do to high performers on a team?
The single most damaging thing they can do to high performers is, I think, destroy or break their trust or belief in the organization, and therefore their willingness to put in the effort, which then becomes a really dangerous cancer. Because when people see someone who was a high performer become disillusioned, it's easy for those other folks to become disillusioned, and it spreads fast. And so I think the danger is taking the things that your top performers cared about and were passionate about and breaking them. Because when that happens, it spreads quickly. Every group has a leader by title, and every group has a leader. And it's not always the same person. Not always, but frequently enough, the organic leader, and I'm talking about leader in a positive perspective, because you can have really negative organic leaders too, but that positive kind of organic leader, the person that is the resource for their peers, the person that people look up to, the person that the team listens to, when that person becomes disillusioned or loses their passion, that leader spreads it to everyone else. And so if the leader by title is creating an environment like that, the big risk is that non-titled leader, that organic leader within the organization, can spread their disillusionment without even saying anything, because people can see it. People go, well, if that guy or that woman feels this way, and I already have this one concern, what the heck is going on here? And I think that is one of the bigger risks. I think the second risk is, even if there is short-term gain, the long-term doesn't typically look as good. Winning at all costs. The leader who burns the place down at the end of the day typically does not set up good long-term outcomes and good long-term results. That's not to say that people who get results are only the greatest leaders. I think lots of people can get results who aren't the best leaders. Right. But it's that really bad boss that can really damage a place, in part because what they're damaging is the team. And no boss is what drives success. The team drives success. That leader enables the team to drive success. When you're not enabling your team to drive success, at long term, you fail. And I think that's the other real big challenge.
I couldn't agree. I mean, well said. I mean, I try to coach leaders sometimes that to remind them that you probably got promoted to that management role because of some kind of technical acumen, some kind of skill, and you did it really, really well. And so someone tapped you on the shoulder. But there's always a challenge, right? Because once you become in management, once you get into management, you're no longer responsible for the work. You are now responsible for the people that do the work. And it's really difficult for some leaders to make that paradigm shift, right? And sometimes they end up not letting things go, or giving their team members opportunities to shine themselves, right? Because, you've grown because of that, and now you need to let some of that. But sometimes I've noticed recently, and I want to get your opinion about this, Chris, that Sometimes leaders don't want to let go. They don't want to delegate because they say, oh, well, it takes too long to train. I can just do it myself in a much quicker time. And I get the mentality. But it's still bad leadership. But there are some leaders that might fall into this toxic category that hold on to stuff that they know they should let go of because they feel like, okay, this is my special piece. This is what makes me valuable to the company. This is my toy and I don't want to share it. When you see that, or when you hear of those kinds of things, how can that bring down a department? How can that have, what negative impacts can that have on the team?
Well, I mean, even before you go to the team, I will say it is possible for that person to be successful to an extent. Typically, the ceiling on their success is much lower than other leaders because it's hard to scale when that is your tactic, when that is your method. Mm-hmm. So if I, as a leader, let's say I'm engaging in those behaviors and I am being rewarded at my level because the metrics that are used to measure my work look good. I'm not letting people make decisions. I am making decisions for them. It is command and control. You're going to do what I tell you. I'm the only one that can come up with the right strategy. So you're just going to execute what I come up with. That may work to an extent. But as you look in your own career to grow and scale, that is guaranteed to fail as the scope of your responsibility gets bigger, as your organization gets bigger. And so one of the things I tell leaders is you are putting an artificial cap on your own growth because at some point, one of two things happen. You either don't get that bigger role because all of your leaders can see that you can't scale and it's only successful at the level that you're at, or you do get that bigger role and you will ultimately live in pain and at some point failure because it's not a scalable strategy as things get bigger and bigger and bigger. And within every organization, where that ceiling lives for that person is different, right? It's not the same everywhere. So my starting point is there is a way, and I have seen leaders be successful managing that way, but they put us a ceiling on how great they can be. And it's an artificial ceiling, I think, in many cases, because they could be better if they modified. But then the other side of that is think about, you can go back to just good old fashioned HR work. How are you developing the next layer? Because if you're the only one making decisions, you're not teaching other people how to make decisions. What next? How are you developing not just your team, but how are you developing some sense of backup or redundancy within your organization so that when you aren't here, the place doesn't fall apart? And the advice I give people is to be a really successful leader, to be a really good leader. Start with the mentality that you're doing everything you can to work yourself out of a job. If you start with the mentality that I'm trying to eliminate my job, I don't want to hold things to be more important. I want to make myself less and less and less important. I want to be ultimately creating systems, processes, developing teams and people so that I'm not needed in this role.
Well, wait, 1 second, Chris, though, because you just said something that seems very counterintuitive, right? You just said that, it's almost like your intent is to work yourself out of a job.
Yeah.
Right. And so, okay, so I'm a manager. I'm watching this podcast on YouTube, right? And I'm listening to you and I'm like, this dude's crazy. I'm 55, 60 years old. What I'm going to do? Work myself out of a job? I still got kids in college I got to pay for. What do you say to that insecurity with that?
Here's the magic. Once you've positioned yourself that way and your bosses see that, you aren't needed in that role. You're needed in the bigger role now. Now you're needed in the next role. Because if you were capable of building teams and systems and processes and developing other people in that way, where you become less and less and less critical to the team, what you're really showing the organization is you are now ready to scale to something bigger because you don't need me in all these transactions at this level. I've created strategies. I've created processes and systems that have allowed other people to be successful. So I can now move to the next role where I'm even further away from the work, where at that level, that's how you have to operate. I, at my level, cannot operate at a transactional level all day long. Can't be successful that way. And I need people who can operate at that level throughout my HR organization. I need people down the ladder that can do all those things. And if I am not developing that in others, I can't ever scale up to the next role. And so if you can think of as a mental exercise, work myself out of a job, make myself less important to this team, what you're really doing is showing how crucial you are to the organization at large, because many people are not capable of doing that. They're not capable of operating at that level. And if you show you can, what you're really telling the business is I can operate at a much higher level. I am not needed at this transactional level because I've taken all I know, all my knowledge, and I've given it to other people. I've built systems and processes, checks and balances. I've done all that. That's what your boss does. And that's what your boss's boss does. And so what you're really doing is demonstrating that you're ready for the next level. And I think that's crucially difficult for a new leader. And as you said, it's very counterintuitive. But just take 2 steps back and look at, how does your boss lead? How does your boss's boss lead? Go all the way to the CEO. CEO is not in transactions. Can't run a big business that. Now, maybe in a small organization they can, but again, as you scale, it's not possible. And so what you are demonstrating is an ability to think bigger, operate at a higher level. And I tell people in HR all the time, do not think like an HR leader. I hate that term with a passion. Think like a business leader. What you really need to do is think like a CEO. If you can think like a CEO, you're going to be a better person leading the HR function. But think and operate at that level. Push yourself to think and operate at that level. You're going to be more successful.
Why do toxic employees tend to always get promoted?
There is a book. I've gone through so many copies of it. I order it like 10 copies at a time, then I give away all 10 copies. Because I think people, particularly at lower levels of management, struggle when that toxic employee is also really, really high performer. And so the book is by Robert Sutton. He's a professor, I think, from Stanford. It is called The No Asshole Rule. Everybody needs to read this book, particularly when you see that problem in your organization. You should hand it out like candy. And Professor Sutton talks about why he called it the no asshole rule, because there is a difference between a jerk and an asshole in his language and as he describes it. And so I'll take the toxic employee to the extreme and say, or actually think of it the Netflix way. I think when Hastings was the CEO of Netflix, he coined a slightly different term within Netflix, but he said no brilliant jerks are allowed to be in this organization. And I think when you see that toxic employee continually being rewarded, it is typically because leaders are misunderstanding the short-term value of their high performance against the long-term cost of the damage that they're doing to the team and the organization. And so ultimately, I think it is a gross misunderstanding of culture. It is a misunderstanding of the damage that these folks do that's harder to see because it's not measured in data that you can see tomorrow. It's going to show up in data that are grossly trailing indicators of a problem, because you're not going to see it till the problem exists. You're going to see it as the turnover increases. You're going to see it as other people start suffering and failing and all sorts of other issues. And so I think the reason that happens is leaders who don't quite balance on the whole the totality of someone's contribution to the organization. When you're looking narrowly at how is this person doing at the work I've given them, the tasks, and you're not looking holistically as how is this person contributing to my business and my organization, you make those mistakes. When you start looking more holistically at their contributions as a person and the pros and cons of them being in your organization, I think you start to view things a little differently. One of the ways I try to address this is I give that book out like candy. I think every leader should read this book because, to your question's point, these people exist in every organization. And if you aren't careful, they can destroy the place.
Wow. So let's change the dynamic just a little bit, because I want to switch this more. I want to switch this. I mean, this is great stuff. I mean, you and I could probably sit down and talk about this for two. We actually will when we get to Visionary Conference. We're going to talk more about it.
Yeah.
If for those of you in the Executive Network who have not yet signed up for the Visionary Conference in Atlanta in a few weeks, what the hell are you waiting for? You should do that. But I want to talk about HR versus business, right? And so because there's a lot of HR folks, you see all this rhetoric about, oh, I want to be at the table, sit at the table, I gotta have a seat at the table, blah blah blah. But when you look at their day-to-day value to the organization, day-to-day interactions, they're freaking ordering birthday cakes for the the birthday parties. They're managing spreadsheets. They're doing document control and things like that. And so I want to kind of talk about, because you've been on both sides, you have that very unique perspective where you've been on both sides, the business and the HR side, which HR is actually part of the business. But I want to talk really about what strategic HR looks like. So you said to me one time that HR needs to get the word no out of its vocabulary, right? And so in your opinion, what does that actually look like in actual practice? And how do we stop defaulting to being so risk aversion that we don't even try to get that out of our normal vocabulary?
Yeah. I start with what I said earlier. You need to have the perspective that you're here to make this company more money, right? If you work in a for-profit organization and that is not your North Star, you are probably going to struggle with this. And so if that's your North Star, if you understand that my role, nobody exists in the company unless the business believes that their existence adds to the bottom line, right? And so if you understand that to be your role, then the question is, how do I not only make this business more money, but how do I show the business that that's what I'm doing? And so you start thinking of all the ways you can look like a cost center. Start thinking of all the ways you can look like roadblocks. Those are not ways that you're going to demonstrate you make the business more money. So you got to be really critical of them. And you got to find ways to minimize, reduce, get rid of them. And that's in the spirit of get no out of your vocabulary, because instead what you're trying to do, and let's use, the example of, a manager wants to make some decision, they're coming to HR. I tell people all the time, you can make whatever decision you want. You will never use me or my team as a CYA rubber stamp function. You will own the decision you make because I don't make decisions for you. What I do is I can help give you data that you may not have, because the benefit I have that you don't have as I see this across the whole organization. I know the 15 other times this has happened. I know when we've tried your idea and what the outcomes were. And so if I can help you make a better decision grounded in data that because of your role, you may not have, I can help arm you with what is necessary to make a good business decision. I can put up potentially some guardrails to protect the organization from disastrous decisions. But those guardrails are typically not me saying no. Those guardrails are typically, I need more people involved. I need to get other people and other perspectives involved. And I need to be really good at knowing when to and when not to do that. And so what I tell folks all the time, when you hear a leader about to make what you think is a really bad decision, step one, question yourself. Why do you think this is a bad decision? Are you picking a fight because you think it's not fair? If so, are you understanding fairness from their perspective? I call this empathetic leadership. You need to understand from their perspective what is fair and what is not, because you might be losing that point I made earlier. What is fair to the business and what is fair to the employee? Okay, great. Number two, do you not have all the information? Number three, are you thinking from the perspective of the business instead of HR? You work in HR, but you work for this company. So you need to stop thinking like you work for HR. You don't. You work for this company. And so if that is the case, check your own perspective. The second step is understanding all those things allows you to then say things like, okay, let me help you now understand what the potential outcomes look like.
One of the things that I talk about lately, it's on the most recent episode of the My Friend HR podcast, and I'm actually going to be speaking about this at the Texas SHRM conference in a couple of weeks, is about the broken trust, right? You go online, you look on Instagram, TikTok, there's all these videos. It's almost become stylish now to talk about how bad work is and how bad the relationships are with your boss. And, oh, here's how you get over, and here's how we fake PTO days or things like that, right? And so in my viewpoint, Chris, I feel like the trust between employee and manager is just broken, right? It's broken. There's in especially in some organizations. I think some organizations have kind of figured it out, but I think for the most part, there's still a lot of mistrust between, what you would call rank and file employees, frontline employees versus the people who are meant to lead them. In your viewpoint, why do you think so many people are disengaged right now? And does broken trust play a part in that, or is it something bigger?
My gut reaction is twofold. And the first of which is, this is why I don't have Facebook or TikTok anymore. Because I think there's actually this very interesting thing that's happening in the world. I see it in my own friend group circle. The things on social media influence the way people live their lives tremendously. There's tons of studies on this. I mean, you can look at the really negative studies at how Facebook has influenced, teenage depression, suicide ideology, all sorts of things. And part of that is, you comparing yourself to others. And it's really easy to kind of jump on the bandwagon and say, well, you feel this way and I feel this way. So I think part of the challenge that we're facing is social media. I'm not sure I have seen enough data to fully convince me that at some orders of magnitude difference from, let's call it pre-COVID world versus today, that is actually true. I think there are really loud, socially amplified voices and examples that might make it seem more true than it is. That is not to say that engagement hasn't trended downward. We have seen that. That is not to say all these things, but the Great Resignation is a good example. It wasn't really that true. Yes, the quit rate in the US increased. Yes, all those things shifted in a way, but it wasn't as big as it was sold. And a lot of those employees were shuffling themselves right back. So then it was the great boomerang. And now it's the great stay, where people are staying before they find another job. I thought that's what people used to do. When did you quit? When you didn't have another job? What are you talking about? So part of this, I think, is the echo chamber is really loud. And I think that echo chamber influences the way people think, feel, and behave. That's one. Two, I do believe there are unique challenges happening and unique pressures on businesses because there is a supply and demand labor imbalance. The US does not have enough heads for the open jobs. There are lots of examples throughout history, both recent and far, where this happens to an economy. And generally speaking, there are very few ways to fix it. The problem of how polarized personal and political thoughts are in this country and in the world right now has resulted in unique challenges in addressing these economic problems, because these economic problems become political problems. And so I think that puts unique social pressures on businesses that are manifesting themselves in additional tension within the workplace. I don't have enough labor. I don't have labor that knows everything I need them to know. It's not the right skilled labor for the jobs I have available. And businesses are struggling to come up with ways to address that. That creates, I think, some more tension between organizational leaders and the folks who are actually doing the work. So I think, to your point on trust, I think some of what it is related to is businesses trying to figure out how to operate in an environment that is a little historically unique for the United States. This labor imbalance started in 2018. It is not a COVID problem, and it has continued. We've seen that gap shrink, but not enough that business as usual has been operating as it relates to how you acquire talent to do your job. We then have these dramatically quick changes happening with AI, changing how businesses think about the work and do their work. We have I think part of where this trust is coming from is change and unknown. The unknown is scary and change is hard. No one leading a business today has worked in a labor economy that we have today. No one running a business today has worked in that type of environment because it is new for everyone in the last 3 generations. The rate in which change is happening from a technology perspective, the noise in the social media echo chamber has created uncertainty and, to some extent, maybe some level of fear. And that is probably impacting trust in a way. But I think it is a combination of uncertainty and fear that is what's impacting trust, because the downside for many organizations is they are also not as transparent. And so some of that trust issue comes from the lack of transparency. And you can be too transparent. I'm not saying hyper transparency is also the right answer, but I think a way to address the uncertainty and the fear is more transparency, which might heal, or maybe I'm being more aggressive than I personally think, but address some of those trust issues that you're describing. But I think they stem from uncertainty and echo chambers more than anything else.
That makes sense. I mean, that is definitely a different way of looking at it in terms of that. And yeah, I think I may impose your policy, pulling off of social media a little bit, other than YouTube, because that's where this video is going to be. But other than YouTube, yeah,
YouTube's great.
Gotta keep that. Gotta keep that. So, all right. Well, look. So I want to switch gears as we kind of start getting towards the end of this, and we're going to make this a little bit more fun, right? We talked about some really hard stuff, and I appreciate you sharing. Time to liven it up, and I can't liven it up without first addressing professional dancer and magician. Really? What? What's the story there?
I have really, from high school through college, there was a period where I thought I was just going to be a dancer. Fun fact, my dad was part of halftime entertainment at Super Bowl 10. So dancing is in the family. In fact, was the first halftime show that wasn't a marching band. The modern version of the halftime show was created by my dad and the organization that he was in. My mom saw him on television and jokingly said, "I'm going to marry that man one day." Ended up in the group, stole him from his girlfriend, and married him. They've been married for almost 50 years. And so dancing is in my family. So I have loved it. And I got into magic because I loved magic and I love the idea of being able to, blow people's minds. And I will tell you, although it is an interesting fun fact, I actually believe to my core that what I learned as a performer, whether it is as a magician or a dancer where I was on stage and producing shows and choreographing, that has had some of the largest impact on my work within business. Because at the end of the day, we are all performing at work to some extent. And learning the things you learn being on stage, learning the things you learn interacting with people as a magician has dramatically impacted my approach, how I interact with others. You know, if I'm giving a presentation, I'm talking to you one-on-one, whatever that is, the things I learned from that impact me today. And so I think as fun and as funny as they are, starting a hip hop dance company, and I became very close to considering, you know, touring professionally and all sorts of things. They were fun moments in my life that I thought were just fun, but I can see now how they dramatically impact my work today. And I think you would do yourself a disservice if you didn't take a dance or an acting class as a leader in business and learn some of those skills, because you will use them at work.
All right. I had to ask. I definitely had to ask. I'm surprised I hadn't asked you before, but yeah, no, I
Yeah.
All right. So before we wrap up, I prepared an actual game I'd like to play with you. It's kind of a
All right.
it's kind of a lightning round game. I'm kicking around names, but right now I'm calling it Cancel It or Keep It.
Cancel it or keep it. All right.
Right. And so basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw a couple of slogans, sayings, mantras, whatever you want to call them at you. And I want you to quickly, we're going to go through them really quickly. So you can't give too much of a deep thought.
Yep.
And say, cancel it or keep it. Okay. And if you want to
All right.
elaborate within 1 or 2 sentences, feel free to do so. All right.
Okay.
You ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Welcome to our company. We're like a family here. Keep it or cancel it.
Oh my God. You know how to be right in every answer you're going to ask me? It depends. That answer is always right. I'm going to say keep it.
Keep it. Really?
Even though I think most people should cancel it, there are examples where you should keep it.
Okay. All right. All right. There's some examples. Okay. Number 2. AI is going to replace HR.
Keep it.
Keep it.
It's going to replace big chunks of HR. It already is. It's not going to replace it entirely, but keep it.
Okay. I love it. All right. We're going to do mandatory in-office returns 5 days a week for culture reasons.
With that excuse, cancel it.
There are viable reasons to return to the office, but that ain't one of them, right?
We've been in the office 5 days a week since the beginning. So yes. But
annual performance reviews. Keep it or cancel it.
Cancel it.
Cancel it. What? We don't measure performance anymore?
We do. We should just be talking to you more frequently than once a year.
All right. HR should plan the company birthday parties.
Nah, cancel that. Cancel it quick.
No more. No more. All right.
I don't. We won't.
We don't do that. All right. Look, that was fun. All right. So this is the segment that we actually call the mic drop. And this is where my guests get a chance to share a nugget of wisdom that they either was told by a mentor, they've learned along the way. But these are things you can't Google. These are things you have to live it, experience it, or be told it. So, Chris, what is your mic drop?
The number one superpower you need in HR is the power to influence people. And if you are not good at influencing others, you are going to struggle, I think, to do HR work well, particularly as you grow within the organization, because this is a role where technically kind of have the power to tell nearly everybody in the company what to do. But practically, I cannot tell anybody in the company what to do, because if I do, I start damaging culture and I start damaging the ability for other people to lead. And so the power of influence is the single most important power someone in HR needs to have. And you can use it for good or you can use it for bad. And you can use it for all sorts of reasons. But if you don't have that power, I don't think you will be long-term successful in this work.
And there it is. Chris's mic drop.
Oh, there you go.
There
I like
it.
it.
Look, I was over here. Then I had to bring it over here. There you go. Well, look, first off, Chris, man, brother, thank you so much for bringing your energy and your passion and your knowledge to the show today. So I think our viewers got a good slice in terms of like, what does good HR look like, especially from a business perspective? Because I think you and I have talked about this over a drink. Business results and providing good, stable careers for our employees don't have to be mutually exclusive. As a matter of fact, I think like if you take care of one, you kind of take care of the other as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I appreciate you bringing it. We had some fun today. That was great, and I'm going to see you in Atlanta in a couple of weeks.
That's right. You will. It'll be good.
We're going to be at SHRM Visionaries, and again, folks, if you're part of the executive network and you haven't signed up for Visionaries, what the hell are you waiting for? If you're not part of the executive network, that is a bigger conversation, because if you are a HR leader, I can't think of many other organizations that really provide that high level context in terms of the challenges that we deal with as senior leaders, to provide humanity as well as strategic vision to our organization. Definitely need to take a look into that. And so before we close, I do want to thank you, our listeners, and the overall My Friend in HR community. You guys are not just professionals, you are career conquerors. And I am beyond grateful to walk this journey with you. If you want more My Friend in HR content, please check out our flagship show, the My Friend in HR podcast. It's on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcast fix from. You can always connect with me on Instagram, follow me along with X, and of course, join me on LinkedIn to keep this kind of conversation going. And don't forget, this month, if you subscribe, like, and leave a comment in YouTube on this episode, you will automatically be entered to win a free executive resume review. If you join me on X and leave a comment, I am also giving away a free LinkedIn profile review. So these are just another couple of ways that My Friend in HR is helping you level up your career. If you want to connect with Chris, I will have his contacts at the bottom. Feel free to reach out. This man loves sharing his knowledge and his opinion, both of which are always valuable. So until next time, folks, be well, not just to others, but also to yourself. And remember that your job is meant to support your life. Your life is not meant to support your job. Until next time, my friends.
Have a good one.
And